The government's emergency scheme to save millions of jobs by paying people's salaries will be extended until the end of October. The Chancellor has told the BBC that many jobs, sadly, have already been lost, and there is a growing concern about the cost of the furlough scheme at £14 billion a month. So the Chancellor has announced some significant changes to reduce the final cost. The government will continue to pay 80% of wages, up to £2,500 a month, until the end of July. But from August, employers will be expected to share the cost as their staff return to work, and firms will be able to bring staff back to work part-time, which is not allowed at the moment. Now, the changes to the scheme were made on the day that 627 deaths were recorded from coronavirus in the last 24-hour period, bringing the total on the official calculation to 32,692. We'll hear more from the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, in just a moment. But first, our report is from our business editor, Simon Jack.
Holiday season beckons, and with international travel in disarray, you'd think holiday hotspots like this campsite in Cornwall would be set fair. But it's currently closed, and even as the lockdown is lifted, social distancing rules will mean communal areas like showers and toilets are unusable. Half of the 16 workers here have been furloughed, and not all of them will return.
Well, we're delighted that the furlough scheme has been extended in its current form to the end of July. Very worried about how we as employers are going to make contributions through August, September and October. The reason for that is we have had zero income so far this year. My feeling is there are already many staff that are furloughed whose jobs actually no longer exist. And that is very sad, but it's also very real.
Patrick's furloughed office manager, single mum Lindsay, accepts that the future is uncertain.
I just don't think there's any job security in our industry. If the business is hit hard, we're responsible for lots of people, but if the business isn't secure, the jobs aren't there, mine might not be there.
This brewery in Buckinghamshire has furloughed 10 workers who will now be able to come back part-time after July while still having wages subsidised. Good news for mum of three, Trasna.
I think it's great that it's going to be extended, and being able to have a flexible return to work will be terrific while we're still in doubt about children going back to school.
The furlough scheme is the most significant and expensive government response to the crisis. 1 million businesses are using the scheme, with 7.5 million workers having 80% of their wages paid by the government. And it's costing £14 billion a month. That's roughly what we spend on the NHS and social care every month. From July, employers will be asked to help foot that bill, but many won't be able to. The question is, what happens then?
Do you acknowledge that there are hundreds of thousands, potentially over 1 million people who are effectively now unemployed but just don't realise it yet?
Well, I think it will depend on the support that we're providing overall and how quickly we can come out of this particular situation. We're not going to be able to protect every single job, but I think by any international comparison, the fact that we're supporting 7.5 million people through the furlough scheme should be something that should be universally welcomed.
When employers have to start paying, tough choices will have to be made.
I think the big elephant in the room is going to be what the new employer contribution is going to look like that the Chancellor referred to. From our point of view, it's absolutely critical that any change to the scheme doesn't result in an additional spike in unemployment.
The scheme has helped this Cornish holiday park and 1 million other businesses hang on to staff. But many will be exposed as this flood of government cash eventually, inevitably, begins to recede. Simon Jack, BBC News.
Well, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, has spoken of the heartbreaking job losses already caused by the lockdown. And when asked if the UK was now heading for recession, he acknowledged that the pandemic was going to have a very significant impact on the UK economy. Mr Sunak was talking to our political editor, Laura Kunsberg.
A final check with officials before the formal announcement.
Hi everyone.
The Chancellor will use taxpayers' cash to pay the wages of more than 7 million people until the end of October.
Lindsay, nice to see you.
There's simply no modern comparison to the steps Rishi Sunak has decided to take.
People are working hard. Through no fault of their own, their business has been shut or they can't go to work, and it was important to me that we protected them. And what I've decided to do is to extend the scheme for 4 months, so it will run to the end of October. The first month of that in July, everything will be the same as it is now, and people at home should know that. And for the last 3 months, what will happen is that we will introduce flexible furloughing, so that for companies where it makes sense to bring their employees back on a part-time basis, perhaps, we will allow for that to happen.
But you will be asking businesses to start contributing. How much?
But what we think it's fair to ask businesses at that stage, once everything's opened and we're in recovery, to make a contribution alongside the government in paying people's wages. That also helps us ensure that the scheme can be extended for this period of time.
There are going to be thousands of businesses whose doors are still closed, whether that's a pub or a theatre or a holiday venue. Where are they going to find the money?
Well, the plan that the Prime Minister set out has some clear dates in it that we are all now working towards.
No, but the Prime Minister's made very clear this plan, this timetable might not work.
Well,
so how can you be sure that businesses will be asked to pay more from October? They might not be able to afford to.
Of course, we're all dealing with something that we haven't seen before at this scale. So there's a degree of uncertainty about everything that we're doing. I totally accept that.
How much is this going to cost?
This is an expensive scheme, and I've said that point before. But I also believe it's absolutely the right thing to do. And what's very clear to me is that the cost of not doing this for society, for our economy, for our country would be far higher. And I am simply not going to give up on all these people.
He wants to get production lines going. At this distillery in Kent, 15 staff are on furlough, just 7 working now, making hand sanitizer instead of gin. Is the government ready to acknowledge that so much damage has already been done?
Day after day, we receive emails from people who are desperately worried about being able to put food on the table and losing their jobs. Is there any way, do you think, that we can avoid a recession?
This is going to have a very significant impact on our economy. I mean, that's clear. We already know that many people have lost their jobs, and it breaks my heart. We've seen what's happening with universal credit claims already. This is not something that we're going to wait to see. It's already happening. There are already businesses that are shutting. There are already people who have lost their jobs.
And in which sectors of the economy are you going to try and preserve? Aviation, hospitality, tourism? You can't save everything. Who's going to lose?
And I've been clear, we can't save every job. We can't save every business. You mentioned some sectors which are obviously most impacted by what's happening, but those are also the sectors where we've tried to direct the maximum amount of support.
Dozens of chancellors have sat in number 11. None has seen the economy slide so fast, or the scale of the dilemmas he will face.
What's your instinct? Will there have to be tax rises? Are you prepared to live with higher levels of borrowing for longer, or do we return to more cuts to the public sector?
Broadly, the agenda that we set out before, and I talked about a budget, is still very relevant. I talked a lot there about investing in our regions to make sure that we can drive up productivity wherever you happen to live. So that agenda remains even more relevant today than it did then, and we will not at all retrench from delivering on that.
But the world's changed so much between the day Rishi Sunak became Chancellor 12 weeks ago and when he turned 40 today. Who can know what may have shifted by the time he's 41? Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Downing Street.
With me here in the studio is our economics editor, Faisal Islam. Faisal, given the very big cost of this scheme, the fact that they've now extended it, albeit in slightly different circumstances, how long can they sustain this?
In a crisis such as this, you really do have to look week to week, month to month. And in that vein, the most important thing is the extension by a month of the full scheme. Over the past few days, we've not been quite sure whether the government's trying to nudge us to go to work or to stay at home. Follow the money here. 12 billion-ish spent on 7.5 million workers and counting, paying the vast bulk of their wages in order to stay at home. That's the bottom line. And the reason why they've made this move is that a coalition of union leaders and business leaders told the Treasury that if it wasn't made, then hundreds of thousands of layoffs would occur almost instantaneously. So that's the fire the Chancellor has doused today. But the government's also trying to restart important parts of the economy, like the housing market. Estate agents are going to reopen. They found a way, they think, to make housing moves work. with social distancing, so we will get transactions. What that will do to prices is anyone's guess, but a little worry there. And then in general, tomorrow, we get the first hard data of what is happening to the whole economy with the GDP figures, the economic national figures that will come out for the first quarter. The worst figures are expected in this quarter, but even for that first quarter, they could be the worst for decades and will signal what will end up being a recession. Precisely why the Chancellor wants this scheme to be extended so that that drop ends up with as rapid a bounce back as possible.
Faisal, again, many thanks. Faisal Islam there, our economics editor.